Imagine you're trying to earn a Michelin star, right?
Okay, high stakes.
Yeah, super high stakes. But before you even start cooking, you walk up to the judges and you tell them, I am only going to use water, salt, and literally one single potato.
Wow, I mean, that sounds completely impossible. They'd probably laugh you out of the kitchen.
Exactly. It sounds insane. But the true essence of anything, whether we're talking about, culinary arts or music, or honestly just navigating your everyday life,
Hmm.
it's usually revealed not by adding more ingredients, but through this really rigorous aesthetic of reduction. Stripping things away is how you actually find the core.
It forces a really profound shift in perspective, doesn't it? Because we are so culturally conditioned to believe that more is always better.
Oh, totally. More is more.
Right. We want more features on our phones. We want more layers in our entertainment, more noise in our daily schedules. We just assume that limiting our tools means limiting our expression.
Which brings us right to the central question we are exploring in our deep dives today. How does intentionally limiting your tools, like purposefully stripping away all those extra layers, actually create a deeper and more, I guess, transcendent experience?
It's a great hook.
Yeah, so today we are diving into this super detailed history of Detroit minimal techno. And we're focusing really heavily on the philosophy of its pioneer, Robert Hood, and obviously the global artists who took his framework and just, reshaped the world with it.
It really is a fascinating philosophical framework that is just perfectly disguised as underground dance music.
Right. And here is why you, listening right now, should care about a musical movement born in the 1990s club scene. We currently live in an era of just absolute total information overload.
Oh, for sure. Constant noise.
Exactly. Our attention is fractured by a million different additions to our daily lives. So learning this philosophy of subtraction from these techno pioneers is honestly the ultimate shortcut to finding the signal in the noise. It's like a survival tool. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Because to really grasp the gravity of this aesthetic of reduction, we first have to look at the environment it was born out of. You can't really understand the sound of subtraction until you understand what exactly was being subtracted from.
Right. And that takes us straight to Detroit in the decades following that massive mid-century industrial boom. So Robert Hood was born there in 1965.
Yep, 1965.
And the backdrop of his upbringing was this incredibly vivid, shifting landscape. Like imagine walking through a massive abandoned automobile factory in the late 1980s.
But prosperity is just gone.
Completely gone.
Yeah.
The immense prosperity of the Motor City has just faded away. And what is left behind are these extreme, harsh physical contrasts. You have these colossal, cavernous, empty spaces, profound and heavy silence. And yet, and this is the crazy part, there are still the lingering ghosts of that relentless mechanical repetition everywhere you look.
And what's fascinating here is how a physical environment's literal emptiness birthed an entirely new musical structure. Because Detroit's history of massive prosperity, followed by this severe urban collapse, it created a very specific psychological and architectural landscape.
Right. The vibe of the city was just completely altered.
Exactly. And early Detroit techno pioneers, guys like Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, they laid this brilliant foundation, taking electronic music and injecting it with the soul of the city.
Right. The originators.
Yeah. But what Robert Hood did was look at the literal physical void of that collapsed infrastructure and translate it directly into a sonic landscape.
Which is wild to think about. He didn't just write a song about feeling isolated in Detroit. He actually figured out how to make a synthesizer and a drum machine sound exactly like the acoustic space of a vacant warehouse.
He literally turned architectural decay into audio.
Wow.
I mean, think about it. When you stand in an empty factory, a single sound bounces off the concrete and just reverberates. There is no plush carpeting or furniture to absorb the noise, right?
Yeah, it just echoes.
It is raw, it's metallic, and it's isolating. And that environment became the literal template for his drum patterns.
So knowing that background, you might expect a young artist in that kind of harsh industrial environment to just be, incredibly angry and loud. And at first, that is actually the path he took.
Right, with underground resistance.
Exactly. In 1989, Hood joined the legendary electronic music group Underground Resistance, alongside Jeff Mills and Mike Banks.
And underground resistance was an absolute powerhouse. They were highly political, heavily focused on expressing societal frustration, and deeply rooted in using this blistering, high-tempo electronic music as a tool for outward resistance against the system.
Oh yeah, they were intense. Ski masks, remaining completely anonymous, and basically sonically shouting at the establishment.
Very outward-facing aggression.
Right. But the timeline shows a really surprising pivot here. He joins this massively influential group in 1989, and by 1992, he leaves. He just steps away entirely.
Yeah, super short stint.
And when I was looking over this history and the source material, I found myself thinking, like, why walk away from a movement dedicated to such powerful outward resistance? You are making a huge cultural impact alongside these heavy hitters, and then you just quit. It almost feels like a retreat, honestly.
Well, I mean, it definitely looks like a retreat from the outside, but it is actually a massive psychological shift for him.
How so?
Well, while underground resistance was all about that outward energy projecting force and frustration out into the world, Hood started questioning the fundamental meaning and the role of sound itself. He realized his true path wasn't outward, it was inward.
Oh, so he started looking at the microscopic tools instead of just the macroscopic message.
Exactly. He took all of that intense revolutionary energy, and instead of throwing it at the political system, he converged it directly onto the architecture of the music itself.
That's a huge pivot.
It is. The choice to move toward minimalism was a conscious, aggressive pursuit of pure musical truth. He wanted to see what happened when you stopped shouting and started demanding that the listener lean in to hear the whisper.
Man, that is so powerful. Demanding they lean in.
Yeah.
And that pursuit of pure truth materializes into a physical blueprint in 1994 with an album that just completely changed the trajectory of electronic music.
Minimal Nation.
Minimal Nation. But when you look at the actual anatomy of these tracks, it is almost absurdly bare.
Oh, it's skeletal.
Yeah, skeletal is the perfect word. We're talking about just a kick drum, a hi-hat, and the tiniest, most skeletal synth fragments. That goes back to the Michelin chef analogy from the beginning.
Yeah.
If you only have 3 ingredients, every single one of them has to be flawlessly executed. There is absolutely nowhere to hide.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, let's break down what that actually means for your ears. In traditional dance music of that era, you have a kick drum driving the beat, but it is usually buried under a heavy rolling bass line, right?
Right, tons of low end.
Exactly. Plus layers of rhythmic percussion, sweeping synthesizers, maybe a vocal sample over the top. In Minimal Nation, Hood strips all that away.
Just gone.
Gone. You are left with the raw, naked thud of the 4/4 kick drum. It hits, and then there is this uncomfortable amount of space. And just when your brain is begging for a bass line to fill the void, he drops in a single crisp hi-hat on the offbeat.
And if that kick drum is even slightly off in its timing or its tone, the whole track falls apart. There's no massive bass drop to cover up the mistake.
None. But Hood wasn't removing sounds just for the sake of being edgy or avant-garde. He was extracting the very core of the groove.
Finding the essence.
Exactly. By cutting away the excess fat, the fundamental skeletal structure of the rhythm was laid bare. What he proved is that minimalism in this context isn't a restriction at all. It isn't about what you cannot do. It is a magnet for finding absolute freedom.
Right, because when you aren't bogged down by 50 different instrumental tracks all competing for the same sonic space, the 3 elements you do have can interact in infinitely complex ways. But that brings up a really interesting challenge. Let's say you successfully strip the sound down to its skeleton in 1994. How do you evolve from there?
That is the million-dollar question.
Right. I feel like the immediate trap of minimalism is that you either just repeat the same bare bones trick until you become a parody of yourself, or you slowly start adding the fat back on until you aren't a minimalist anymore.
It is the ultimate creative trap, but Hood navigated it brilliantly with his subsequent works, specifically the album Internal Empire and his EP series called Movable Parts.
What's his strategy there?
Well, instead of adding new instruments, he leaned heavily into mechanical details and micro changes. He figured out how a tiny, almost microscopic adjustment in a repetitive loop can dictate the entire dynamic of a room.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's define what those microscopic adjustments actually are, because the technical side is just fascinating. We are talking about things like tweaking the decay on a cymbal.
Yeah, the decay.
And for anyone unfamiliar, decay is basically just how long a sound rings out before fading to silence.
Right. And if you tweak the decay on a hi-hat by even a millisecond, it goes from a sharp, aggressive, militaristic tick to a loose, relaxed sound.
And suddenly the entire mood of the track shifts from tense to melancholic, all without adding a single new note.
It is a masterclass in the philosophy of choice. When you only have 3 sounds playing, every single sound left in the track is a deliberate, high-stakes decision.
You really have to commit.
Internal Empire proved that minimal structures could create incredibly deep, introspective acoustic spaces. Minimal techno, at its core, is the precision of judgment. It is knowing exactly what to keep and, more importantly, having the sheer discipline to know what to throw away.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second, though.
Go for it.
Because when most people think of purely instrumental, highly repetitive, minimal electronic loops, they think of something cold.
Sure, yeah.
They picture something mechanical, robotic, almost soulless like an assembly line in a factory. But the sources we use for this deep dive argue the exact opposite. They frame this as a deeply spiritual, almost religious experience.
Yes, they do.
So how does that actually work on a physical level?
Yeah.
You take these hyper-precise loops, blast them to a crowd in a dark club for hours. Where is the soul in that?
Well, the answer lies in the psychological mechanics of how the human brain processes repetition. Think about traditional pop music, right? Listening to it is kind of like riding a roller coaster.
Okay, how so?
You are strapped in, waiting for the sudden drops, the loops, the big chorus, the vocal run. Your mind is highly active, constantly anticipating the future structure of the song.
All right, you were always waiting for the drop. You were never really just sitting in the present moment of the song. You're looking ahead to the hook.
Exactly. But minimal techno functions more like a sensory deprivation float tank.
Oh, wow.
The environment is so static, so relentless, and so repetitive that eventually your brain just stops anticipating changes. You realize there is no big pop chorus coming.
Right.
The kick drum becomes the water in the float tank. It's always there at a constant temperature until your brain stops paying attention to it entirely. You are literally starved of structural anticipation.
And what happens to the brain when it is starved of that anticipation for, 10 or 15 minutes straight?
The listener's perception of time slowly begins to alter. You become locked into the present micro-moment, and eventually, this induces a literal psychological trance state.
That is wild.
It really is. It transcends being mere dance music and becomes a structural device for altering consciousness.
So the religious nuance or the spirituality isn't necessarily coming from the synthesizer itself. It is coming from the void the synthesizer creates.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The stripped-down, repetitive sound creates a blank canvas. Because the music isn't explicitly telling you how to feel with a sappy lyric or a massive orchestral swell, it prompts deep concentration.
It makes room for you.
Exactly. It creates a space for the listener's mind to wander inward. You project your own internal emotional state onto the rhythm.
The music isn't cold, it's just a mirror. It is getting out of the way so you can finally hear your own thoughts clearly.
Sound is reduced to create space for the mind. That is the true power of the genre.
But just when you think you have this whole minimalism thing figured out, that it is strictly about serious, dark, introspective concentration in a pitch-black room, the script flips entirely.
Oh, yeah. The pivot with his 2010 project, Floor Plan, completely disrupted expectations.
It really did. So he releases this track called Never Grow Old, and the fusion is jarring in the best way possible. He takes those cold, skeletal, repetitive techno structures, and he completely smashes them together with the bright, festive, ecstatic energy of gospel music.
It's brilliant.
He literally samples a massive gospel choir and layers it right over the minimal kick drum.
This raises an important question about the emotional capacity of minimalism. There's this preconceived notion that a stripped-down framework is only capable of supporting dark, brooding atmospheres.
Right. But gospel is pure, unadulterated jubilation. It is the literal sound of celebration.
And by injecting elements of gospel into the minimal framework, Hood proved a vital point. Stripping away excess doesn't mean stripping away joy. He created a space where spiritual uplift, celebration, and rigid, minimal structure coexist perfectly on the dance floor. It proved that the minimal blueprint is strong enough to support the heaviest emotional weight you can place on it. Whether that is profound sorrow or ecstatic joy, it just doesn't break under the pressure.
And a structural language that flexible was never going to stay contained within the city limits of Detroit.
Yeah.
It became a global common language for artists around the world. So instead of just running down a list of names, let's look at how wildly different artists applied this exact same philosophy of subtraction to entirely different genres.
The adaptability of the minimal kick drum is staggering. Once it got out of Detroit, it went everywhere.
Let's look at Canada, for example.
Yeah.
You have an artist named Jesse Somfay who took this minimal techno blueprint and started blending it with shoegaze.
Right.
And if you aren't familiar with shoegaze, it is basically a subgenre of indie rock built on massive, blurry, distorted walls of guitar noise and breathy, really indistinct vocals. It is essentially a thick fog of emotion.
Very dense sound.
It's super dense. But Somfei took that chaotic, blurry fog and anchored it to the relentless, disciplined structure of a minimal kick drum.
And in that case, the kick drum acts as a tether, keeping the listener grounded while the atmospheric textures swirl around them. It gives the fog a skeleton.
Yeah, exactly. And then you contrast that with a producer named Ditch, all the way over in Sendai, Japan, who applied these ideas to minimal house music.
House music is a completely different beast.
Right. It's inherently warmer, more swing-based, heavily focused on groove. But Ditch used the aesthetic of reduction to create these incredibly bouncy, precise, stripped-down club tracks that feel entirely different from a foggy Canadian shoegaze record.
And then you also have the entire dub techno movement over in Germany, driven by artists like Dub Taylor.
Oh yeah, the dub scene. Dub music is all about deep, echoing underwater space and heavy bass. They took the Detroit minimal blueprint and submerged it, using delay pedals and echoes to create tracks that feel like you were dancing at the bottom of the ocean. And then, of course, you have that massive 2004 smash hit Rocker by the German duo Alter Ego, which took a more aggressive electro route.
So you have Canadian shoegaze, Japanese house, German dub techno, and electro.
Yeah.
Totally different vibes, totally different emotional landscapes, but they are all speaking the exact same structural language.
They are all working off the exact same foundational thesis. They are exploring the infinite possibilities that arise when you commit to the aesthetic of reduction. Whether it is dark, bright, ambient, or aggressive, the common thread is the precision of choice.
Right.
It's all about what happens when you refuse to rely on excess.
So what does this all mean for you? We have spent the last quarter of an hour talking about abandoned factories in Detroit, the mechanics of a hi-hat decay, and the psychology of a dance floor trance. But at the beginning of the deep dive, I promised you that this philosophy of subtraction was a survival tool for the modern age.
Because the psychology behind why we crave excess in music is the exact same psychology behind why we clutter our lives. We are afraid of the silence.
We really are.
We are terrified of the void.
Think about your daily life right now. We are living in an environment of constant, aggressive addition. You've got overflowing email inboxes, endless scrolling on social media feeds, a relentless barrage of push notifications, a 24-hour news cycle that basically just demands your outrage constantly. It is a world that insists you add more layers, more tasks, and more opinions to your life just to keep up.
It's exhausting.
It is. It is the cultural equivalent of a song with 50 different chaotic instruments playing all at once.
And that's why Robert Hood's philosophy of subtraction offers such a radical alternative. The ability to discern the essence, to ruthlessly cut away the noise, is more critical now than ever before. Minimal does not mean a lack of substance. It means the absolute precision of choice.
It really is a philosophy of mind. It is having the courage to look at a deeply cluttered arrangement, whether that is an overproduced song, your overwhelmed calendar, or just your mental habits, and decide what is truly essential.
It takes immense discipline to stop adding and start subtracting.
Which leaves us with the final thought, directly inspired by the core message of today's deep dive. The history we explored ends by stating that there is a future only visible through subtraction. So I want you to take a hard look at the dense, cluttered areas of your own life right now, the obligations you say yes to, the feeds you consume, the mental noise you tolerate. If you were to apply this minimal techno aesthetic of ruthless reduction to your own life, if you stripped away all the excess noise today, what pure essential truth about yourself would finally be loud enough for you to hear?